my name is Alison. I am a Colombian researcher. I am inspired by understanding our social reality and especially how we can transform this reality. And because of these interests, I studied economics, I did a PhD, but then I realized that to actually enable change, we needed to act collectively and deliberate and influence in the public discussions, and that's why I created Re Imagining. So what is Re Imaginemos or reimagining? This is a project that brings together people that often do not talk together to speak about one issue that is very relevant in Colombia and Latin America, inequalities. So we sit in the same table, activists, academic, people from government, the media, from business sectors and the arts, and talk about not only the consequences and the roots of these inequalities, but also the potential solutions. And we try to do this by bringing people from different, not only forms of knowledge, but also ways of intervening our social reality. That's why we bring business people and say, what can you do from the business sector? We bring government people and say, what can policy do? And we bring ordinary people to say, how can you change your day-to-day actions to also transform these inequalities and these spaces of discrimination that have become so normalized in our country. So yes, our project is called Re Imagining because we think that reimagining is actually a verb, it's a process, and it's something that many people have forgot to do. So we think that our social reality is given. This is what exists, there's nothing to do, only politicians can change things or things will never change. And what we wanted to say is no, social reality is built by people, by the sum of many actions, and the first step in changing reality is actually naming it and questioning it and then acting together to solve it. So definitely we believe in the possibility of change. I think that's one of the essences of reimagining. And so why did we start Re Imaginemos? Well, Colombia is one of the most unequal countries in Latin America, which is the most unequal region in the world. But this reality and the economic, political, and social inequalities are kind of taken as given. They are invisible and they are unchallenged. This has to do in part with our history and also political dynamics in the region, such as Cuba or Venezuela, which have stigmatized progressive agendas and progressive voices. So we said, well, this is something that we need to talk about, and we need to say this is not a political idea from one sector, but it should be kind of a social issue that unites us, all Colombians, because we actually need to solve this because it affects our lives, either if you're rich or you're poor. At that time, I was writing for a newspaper, and I proposed to them to publish a series of articles talking about inequality. And I started reading about this issue, and I realized that almost every book and article published was published by a white, male, old economist from the city capital, from the capital. So at this time, it became clear that to say something different about inequality, you had to bring together different realities, different lived experiences, but also the voices of the people who actually are affected the most by inequalities and this lack of opportunities that we have taken as granted. So this is how we started the idea of building a network to talk about this issue, again, about the causes and the solutions. And we invited a lot of different people from every region in Colombia and 35 different professions. So not only experts who analyze this from theory, but also people who day-to-day fight inequalities, being social leaders, being street vendors, students, or regular, ordinary citizens. We were very, very intentional in bringing new voices. New voices, in a lot of sense, involve bringing young voices, but also new voices of women, of peasant leaders, of states that are in the Amazon region and that are often kind of left aside on these big conversations. So that has been kind of a very key point of our project. And so we brought them here and said, let's talk, because we think that opening these spaces for the people to listen to new voices and to new messages is a way of changing narratives, and there are a lot of narratives that we need to change in this area of the world. In our project, we cherish diversity, and that's why in the first part of reimagining, we had conversations about 30 different forms of inequality: land, education, food, gender, and we wanted to kind of communicate the issue that inequality is not just one form of inequality, it's not just income inequality, but there are inequalities in almost every aspect of our day-to-day lives and our society. So this diversity of understanding of inequality was the first phase of our project, and then we started the second project, which was called the Territorial Dialogues of Inequality. And here the main point that we wanted to communicate is that the way in which inequalities affect people vary depending on where you are. Of course, whether you're at the global north or global south, but within our countries as well is different if you are in a city or in a rural area, if you're in the Pacific region or the Caribbean region or the Amazon region. So we wanted to really put the emphasis on these kind of local realities that shape or color the ways in which inequalities are generated, but also the potential solutions to these inequalities. And that's why we're actually right now writing a policy report that has recommendations for each of the regions of Colombia, because these regions have different logics and thus the solutions need to have different understandings and ways of being implemented as well. Another way in which we believe that kind of bringing the local into the conversation is important is that we have developed at Reimagining a model of deliberation and a model of taking these messages into the media and the social media. So Dialogues for Action is a way of bringing people who usually do not meet and who usually do not speak about realities and the possibility of transforming these realities. And our Dialogues for Action methodology has 4 main characteristics. The first is bringing together different forms of knowledge and different forms of lives, right? The second is how do you manage the power dynamics, the biases, and the kind of relations that emerge in these conversations between people who have often been in privileged positions or in positions of discrimination. So we had to develop a way of kind of grounding everyone on the same level and connecting at the human condition, and then generate a dialogue. The third characteristic of our dialogues is that we want to have something happen after this deliberation process. And the first step that we take into action is actually writing together between a group of people who participate in the dialogues an opinion piece and an art piece that we then publish in the media. So this action of actually writing and publishing and communicating and advocating is a step that we take further from just the deliberation process, which of course is very important. And the last characteristic of our Dialogues for Action methodology is using arts as a social tool for dialogue and for communications.
Hacia atrás y ver lo que ya nunca podré tener. Fuertes paisajes de mi niñez que tristes vi desaparecer. Eran de un mundo mucho mejor, donde había hermandad y menos dolor. Cuando la gente moría con Dios y no con sonidos de cañón.
So this is why we have invited a lot, or over 60 artists into the table and tell them, let us understand from your languages and from your perspectives how we can also transform these realities and use the language of arts, which are many times more powerful than just words. So how do we get people engaged in the project? And we've already built a network of over 450 participants. And what we figure out is that we need to be very clear about why we're doing this and how we're doing it and what the results are. And the results have been very attractive, and people have seen a value, both the participants of the dialogues and the general public. For example, for academic voices, when we invite them, they cherish the point of talking to other forms of knowledge and to acknowledging other forms of knowledge, and also of being involved in a process that is fast. You're not writing an academic article for 5 years, but you're engaged in a dialogue that lasts around 1 month, and then you have a concrete publication out of it. For social leaders, they have mentioned that they see a lot of value, and this is why they're willing to participate, just in the sense of feeling heard, of feeling amplified, and also of feeling accompanied. Because in a country such as Colombia, being a social leader is not only dangerous, but also a stigmatized and very lonely labor. So finding a community of people who are asking the same questions, who are fighting for the same rights, is very important for them. And on the side of artists, what they have said is that they feel a value in being brought into the center of social dialogues, instead of seeing art as something that happens outside of these discussions or after these discussions. I was talking a while ago about how we cherish diversity in our project. And this is important because Colombia is a very diverse country, not only in terms of cultures and geographies, but also in terms of nature. We are the second most biodiverse country in the world, and we're actually going to have start a conversation from our project about the issue of how biodiversity can actually translate into economic opportunities and jobs and transformations for the people, right? How do we take this concept of biodiversity, of environmental protection, and actually make it a way of transforming the inequalities that we have in our country? I get asked a lot about one specific moment that was transformative or meaningful, or one particular dialogue that has had a lot of value, and this is very difficult to answer because across these 4 years we have had over 450 dialogues and almost 500 people participating in them, and each of them has been a very valuable experience of learning. So it's been really a privilege to listen to people from every corner of the country talk about the issues that matter. It has been also very challenging to kind of balance the urgency of the solutions that we need, but also the hope of acknowledging that a lot of solutions are already being implemented. There are a lot of social leaders, organizations, entrepreneurs actually transforming our country, and I think that having a project that brings together these people and kind of amplifies this message is a very enriching thing and a very meaningful thing, and this is why we continue doing this work despite it being very difficult and demanding in attention, in emotion, but definitely we are putting our heart here into listening to people and learning from people. I think we have a lot of things to learn every day, and this is why deliberation is so important, because just listening to people who come from different backgrounds, who see reality in different ways, is, as I said, the first step towards generating change, and a change that needs connection between people. And I believe that things are starting to change in Colombia. So when we started the project in 2020, the conversations about inequality were mostly inexistent. But then 2 years ago, Colombia elected the first left-wing president in its history, and these progressive agendas have started to emerge. Of course, this is just a first step and we need concrete changes, but at least there are some narrative transformations that are going on, and we believe that it is very important for people, not only at the elite decision-making level, to acknowledge this. Now, talking about the future of Colombia and the future of our project, I would say that I'm not an optimist or a pessimist, I'm a realist, and listening to so many discussions about our country is very clarifying, in the sense of acknowledging that we have huge challenges, a lot of unmet needs, and a lot of discrimination and injustices, but also that we have a lot of potential, a lot of resources, not only natural resources, but also the resilience of people who have fought for over 60 years to survive in a context that is very violent, in a context that is exploited by other organizations and logics of our system, but people still have a deep attachment to our country, and I believe that that is the energy needed to continue this transformation.
Hacia atrás y ver lo que ya nunca podré tener. Fuertes paisajes de mi niñez que tristes vi desaparecer. Eran de un mundo mucho mejor, donde había hermandad y menos dolor. Cuando la gente moría con Dios y no con sonidos de cañón.